I'd like to welcome everyone to the presentation today on today's webinar of the research report, A National Landscape Scan of Personalized Learning in K-12 Education in the United States. I'm Susan Patrick, President and CEO for iNACOL and co-founder of Competency-Works, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. I'd like to start by introducing our speakers and partners in the research. First, Bethany Gross is a Senior Research Analyst and the Research Director at the Center for Reinventing Public Education, otherwise known as CRPE, and affiliate faculty for the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington, Bothell. Dr. Gross oversees CRPE's research initiatives, including analysis of personalized learning initiatives across the country, portfolio management strategies, and charter schools. She is an authority on systemic strategies to help families access school choice, including unified enrollment systems, information systems, and other efforts. Also, we have joining us today Chris Leon-Vergara, the Chief of Learning Innovation at LEAP Innovations, a catalyst for education innovation. He's a former high school English and science teacher, and prior to LEAP, did work in New Orleans on whole school redesign for personalized learning. Jake Williams is also with LEAP and part of the Education Pioneers Fellowship. He currently serves as a research projects coordinator, and his work there includes data management and analytics, as well as working to measure the impact of programs such as the LEAP Pilot Network. So let's begin. Today's webinar is going to cover the background of this research project that led to 2 national surveys to look at personalized learning across the United States. LEAP Innovations will cover their personalized learning framework, which was the foundation for the teacher and student surveys. Bethany Gross from CRPE will go over the findings from the report, and we will have questions and answers. There'll be time to pause in the middle of the presentation for questions, so please use the chat box. If you look on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, for people as they're signing in or introducing themselves, the organization or school that they're with, and where they're joining us from, please use this chat to type in any questions that you have throughout the webinar. While I'm facilitating, I'll be collecting those questions and presenting them to the speakers. In the middle and at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. So let's begin. What is the Personalized Learning in K-12 Education National Landscape Scan Project? Well, the goal of the project, there was no national study that was examining how personalized learning was emerging with implementation and scaling across the United States. So we dug in and put together a national study to look at the different aspects of personalized learning, the trends and future directions, and what we can take away from these findings. And specifically, there were 2 nationally representative surveys, one for teachers and one for students using LEAP's personalized learning framework. So why did we do this? We believe that K-12 education in the United States is at the earliest phases of a transformation. If you look across the globe, there are countries, some of the more advanced countries that are our highest performers, education systems have been doing personalized learning since the early 2000s and mid-2000s. The OECD organization that studies the 30 highest performing countries across the US has been writing about best practices in personalized learning since 2004 and 2005. Countries like Canada and New Zealand have been implementing personalized learning approaches nationally since 2007. So in the US, in the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen tremendous growth in personalized learning, and we believe that it was an important opportunity to examine the changes in instructional systems, how we can improve learning environments and teaching to better serve students' needs and support optimizing student success. So there was no study prior to the study that was done from 2016 and just released in 2018, exploring the characteristics of personalized learning instructional models and the elements taking hold in schools that are implementing personalized learning. So at iNACOL, we have noticed over the last 3 to 5 years a growth in the presentation proposals for our annual conference. Now, almost half of all presentation proposals to iNACOL are related to implementations across the U.S. from school districts implementing personalized learning in schools. There are opportunities embedded in ESSA, the federal law, and the report highlights where those opportunities to support personalized learning are in Title IV and other programs. There are 9 states that have newly created entry points for personalized learning in state law. So we see this starting to take hold. And if you look at these maps, the first map will be of 2015 and the second map will be of 2018, of how we have seen personalized learning identified by schools and districts reporting the growth. You know, go back and forth again. Here's 2015, and here's the growth in 2018. And what's interesting is what is happening in these clusters around Chicago, around Washington, D.C., across New England, across parts of Texas, and across sections of California. What is causing that growth to take hold and start to spur? So we've discovered through these surveys and research that also included focus groups and individual interviews, 4 supporting practices helping to grow and scale personalized learning. And those practices are the development of professional learning communities, the use in schools of learner profiles that have both academic and more holistic data about students and what their passions are and interests and needs so that schools can better meet students where they are. The focus on empowering students and learner agency as reflected in the use of learning progressions of students over time and integrated student supports and student support services. So to conclude on the background of the personalized learning national landscape scan in the U.S., iNACOL sought to partner with CRPE to lead the research, with LEAP Innovations on the use of their outstanding surveys that they have, teacher surveys and student surveys that they've used within their own populations and that have been used nationally for the Next Generation Learning Challenges grants, and the University of Chicago's NORC program, which does research and implements and administers the survey. So we're thankful for our partners to carry out this research and the conducting of these 2 national surveys, one of teachers and one of students. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Chris from LEAP to talk about the domains and the personalized learning framework that LEAP has researched and published. Chris, over to you. Chris, if you can toggle on the microphone so we can hear you, please.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now? I think I got it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we're on visit. So one, just huge thanks to iNACOL. This has been a fascinating and exciting partnership around this national survey. And for LEAP Innovations, to give you a sense of where we came from, really when LEAP started 4 years ago and the work in Chicago, we were saying personalized learning, but we had no definition underneath it. Lots of questions around, hey, what does this look like from teachers and principals and even ourselves? And with our research arm of the organization, it was clear that, hey, we got to be very clear on what are the constructs and what's the student experience. And so about But over 3 years ago, we worked with American Institutes for Research and many different practitioners and teachers from a lot of different disciplines to talk through, if you have a student experiencing personalized learning, what is that composed of? And so it's been a learning journey for us, along with additional literature and research reviews to kind of look at what's underneath each of them. But what you see on your screen here, these are kind of the big 4 pillars, or as you call it, 4 domains of personalized learning. I'll walk through them for you from left to right. The first one, learner demonstrated, in terms of progression at your own pace and advancing on demonstrated competency, not time spent on the subject, and really getting to the flexibility around curriculum and assessment and the structures that fit within it. The next one, purple, learner focused, in terms of relevant, contextualized, and designed around understanding of academic and non-academic needs. As we sort of say, this is both for the teacher and also for the student. There's a big part of our work of kids knowing themselves so they can better lead themselves, along with the teacher really understanding the child at a deeper level and the whole child to better inform design of lessons and the classroom environment. Then learner-led, in terms of learners are coached to take ownership of their learning so that adjust to their skills, curiosity, and goals. And this is really a lot of self-reflection, goal setting with the teacher, and working together in partnerships so kids take a much more active role in their education, are aware of it, can advocate for what they need, and move through versus the curriculum or the system just happening to them. And then the last one, learner connected, in terms of learning, transcending the classroom in relevant and accredited ways, connected to families and communities, and being clear that learning is social, and you're working with others, you're building your network, you're building relationships beyond the classroom itself. And so for the surveys themselves, we do clear only the first 3 actually of items. Learner connected is in development, but really going back to the roots, you know, we were starting to work in Chicago, we saw implementations all over the place. Everybody was saying they were doing personalized learning, and there was a lot of concern of there were bright spots, but there were concerning spots, and to really get smart so we could learn over time, how do we create a tool for measurement and reflection, elevating the student voice and experience and elevating the teacher's reflection on practice. And from there, I'll pass it off to my colleague, Courtney, to talk more about the surveys themselves.
Hi everyone, this is Courtney Riley. I'm the Director of Special Projects at LEAP. I apologize, Jake was supposed to be here. He was on a flight today that got delayed, and so he apologizes for not being on the call. But I actually lead our national engagement work around the surveys, so hopefully I can stand in for him today. But as Chris was saying, once we had the framework in place and we were using it with our schools and educators here in Chicago, the next question was, for us, how do we actually know that everything that we are helping the teachers think about putting in place is actually happening in the classroom? How do we measure that change and progression in the classroom in terms of what the teachers are doing and in terms of what the students are experiencing? And we looked around for something to help us with that and didn't find anything. So we went back to American Institutes of Research as well as SRI and spent about 2 years developing a set of valid, reliable tools to help us actually measure the implementation of personalized practices that were taking place in the classroom. And I said over 2 years. It continues to be ongoing work. We think that there is always more to do in terms of tightening and expanding the surveys. It's a living, breathing piece of work. But we have been actually able to use them nationally now for a couple years, and they really provide a 360-degree view of what's happening in the classroom by asking teachers about practice and students about experience, along 3 of our 4 framework components. So learner-focused, learner-led, and learner-developed all have sections on the survey with constructs that enable us to say where a classroom is, where a school is, and where a district is on those three components along a continuum of growth. And we've started to see schools and districts and teachers being able to use these as a measure of growth over time. And then we're also able to provide some comparative regional and national data. And so we're really excited about iNACOL using these surveys in their national landscape scan because it really allows all of the other districts that we're working with who are using it at scale within their districts to place themselves within this national context. So we're really excited to have this partnership.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you both so much for the use of the LEAP personalized learning surveys. It was just wonderful for the entire field to not have to reinvent the wheel in creating a new survey for understanding personalized learning. And so those of you in states, in districts, and in schools, please know this wonderful tool is out there, and the LEAP team has been terrific in sharing and helping and collaborating and allowing the use of their surveys. So thank you so much. Let me go ahead and take any questions that we might have right now on background or the personalized learning framework or the surveys. I haven't seen any questions come in yet, so feel free to type in your questions in the bottom left-hand corner in the chat box. And if I don't see any come in, we will keep moving, knowing that there is time for Q&A at the end, because I'm sure everyone's eager to dig in to the research findings with Bethany Gross. So Bethany, let's go ahead and dig in from the research at CRPE and University of Chicago at NORC on the findings from the report on personalized learning in the U.S. Bethany, thanks.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to be asking Natalie to advance the slides for me because my whole webinar setup isn't quite working right. But again, thanks to Courtney and Chris for setting up and explaining the LEAP surveys. So Natalie, if you don't mind advancing to slide 14. So as Susan said at the start, given the growth of personalized learning engagement and the deepening of our understanding really of what it takes to personalize learning as described by Chris and Courtney earlier, you know, iNACOL felt like it was a really good opportunity to do a national pulse check on the extent to which the core elements of personalized learning, or what's coming to be understood as personalized learning, are present in our nation's schools. So an important thing to remember is that in this national landscape, for the most part, we are reaching out to educators who weren't necessarily part of some big personalized learning initiative. This is just the work that they do and the way they understand teaching and learning outside of any specific initiative around this. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. So just to advance to slide 15, just as a quick reminder, Chris described this all earlier, the survey that we used drew very heavily from the LEAP surveys, and specifically because we were administering a national survey, we kind of had to have a nice short survey that we were administering. We focused on three domains of the LEAP learning framework, and specifically the domain of learner demonstrated, so the extent to which the learning experience allows students to sort of advance based on demonstrated competency as opposed to time spent on a subject. the extent to which the work was, the classroom is learner focused, so it's where the educational experience of kids and the content and activities kids are engaged in is really relevant and contextualized in their own experiences. And then finally, the learner-led domain, which focuses on the extent to which students themselves are really taking ownership over their learning and having some substantial say as to what and how they're learning. So when we we administered the surveys in partnership with NORC and LEAP, these were the three domains we were really focused on. So moving on to slide 15. So as Susan said earlier, we conducted these national surveys. As we reached about 3,000, or a bit more than 3,000 teachers in all grade spans and all core content areas. And on the next slide, slide 17, you'll see that we also reached about 1,100 students in grades 5 through 12. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you some of the most striking themes and data from the report. I should say that given our short amount of time here, and because we do want to give you the chance to ask questions, I'm not going to be able to cover everything that's in the report. There's quite a bit of information in there. So just consider what I'm discussing here to be a bit of a teaser. There's a lot more in the report, and I hope you get the chance to check it out. So moving on to slide 18. So this is just to orient ourselves to the three domains and the survey itself. So the LEAP learning framework, as we mentioned, has we drew from these three domains: learner demonstrated, learner focused, and learner led. There are several items that are included on the survey that contribute to our understanding of each of these domains. But just to get us started, I wanted to sort of show you for the elementary and middle schools kind of the pattern across these domains. So specifically what you're seeing here is that, there was actually quite a lot of engagement of sort of learner-focused classrooms. These are, classrooms, as we said, that where, teachers are really trying to understand their students as individuals and individual learners and capture that in the work that they have students engaging in. We, however, did see that the other two domains, the engagement is a bit more formative. So to the extent to which students are navigating through their learning based on competency, and the extent to which students are really owning and controlling some of what they're learning and how they're learning, is still a bit emergent. So this is these are the scales for the elementary and middle school respondents, or the elementary and middle school teachers. We've also done these for the high school teachers, but I would say that these scales are still being developed at the high school level, and the conclusions from them should be viewed as a bit more tentative. I would say, though, these patterns that we see a fairly strong learner focus, but more emergent and formative experiences around being learner-led and learner-demonstrated are pretty consistent with what we see in the high school. But as I said before, those should be a bit more tentative. For the rest of this discussion, however, I want to dive into each of these domains and really kind of explode a little bit what is in each of them. As I mentioned before, each of these scales, as I've represented here, are really the composite of several different questions, and there's a lot of really interesting detail in those questions. So advancing to the next slide, so slide 19. So that I would say the overarching story that we saw emerging, and I'll try to represent that for you in the next few slides, is that we see teachers nationally on average are building relationships with their students and trying to provide them a strong student-focused experience. But that experience, as we see it, is still stopping a bit short of being student-driven. And I'll get into this in more detail. So moving on to slide 20. So the first conclusion that we drew out of the surveys is that teachers often have a student-centered orientation. Teachers understand their students as learners and try to use that understanding to shape their students' learning experiences. So just to give you some information on this. So on slide 21, the next slide, this is what we see here is that more than most of the teachers, as represented on this slide, say to us or report to us that they understand or feel like they understand their students' strengths in learning and what their challenges are in learning. Just to orient you to this figure a bit, you'll see that the green and blue segments of the bars reflect the percent of teachers who indicated that they felt like they knew the strengths or challenges for all or more than 3/4 of their students. That is, they felt confident in their understanding of the vast majority of the students in their classroom. So again, this is feeding into that sort of learner focus that, yes, teachers do sort of convey that they're understanding their students. And on the next slide, slide 22, you can see that they're sort of using information, especially at the elementary and middle school. They're using information that they have on their students as learners to assign work to them. So to really make sure there's a nice match between what students are working on and what data is revealing is important for their learning. On the next slide, it goes beyond just understanding the kids as learners. Again, the focus is with the focus being on students. Here we see that the majority of teachers are feeling really strong about understanding their students' community context. Again, the majority of teachers are reporting through the surveys that they really understand the community context for all or more than 3/4 of their students, the vast majority of their students. And they're also reporting to us that they try to incorporate the community in their learning and the assignments that they prepare for students. About 60% of teachers reported incorporating students' interest into their lessons about at least half of the time. And more than that, teachers were also reporting to us that they were trying to draw in the outside world into their lessons, and quite frequently, in fact, over 80% of teachers reported that they were trying to make connections to the outside world at least half of the time. Now, on the next slide, slide 24, I think what we have from the student survey is some indication that there may be some misalignment between how teachers are viewing the incorporating of outside work and students. Students were a bit more mixed as to whether they felt like their learning was connected to the outside world. And I would say this is probably an area where we might explore whether students and teachers have somewhat different expectations and understanding of what connected learning looks like. Again, I'll say that there are a lot more details in the report about the relationships between teachers and students, as well as some important variation that we see between elementary, middle, and high school teachers on this front. Quickly, I'll just say that as has been reported elsewhere, and this is not a new a new understanding for us. High school teachers are less likely to report understanding their students' learning interests and challenges, and they are less likely to report understanding all or nearly all their students' community context. This is, no doubt, at least in part due to the fact that our high school teachers on average are serving many more students at any given time than is typical in elementary and middle schools, but it is something for us to keep in mind. So moving on to slide 25, this is the second conclusion we drew out of the survey, and it's that learning overall, though being student-centered, does seem to stop a bit short of being student-driven. Most teachers, as we started to see in the survey, are still pretty reluctant to give students a lot of control over their pacing, their content, and their learning activities. So I'll explain this a little bit more. So on slide 26, the next slide, what we're seeing here is that we've got 3 items that really probed teachers on the extent to which they kind of allow kids to flex in their pacing. And the one on the top looks at the extent to which students can demonstrate proficiency at any time during the unit. Whether the second item has to do with whether they can move ahead if they seem to be learning faster, and the third is really a fairly high bar, and it's can they skip ahead of a unit? Can they just skip out of a unit if they seem to know mastery at the beginning of it or seem to understand that unit at the beginning? And while there is teachers are sort of falling all along the spectrum, we do see that it's pretty limited in the extent to which teachers are allowing students to really push outside of kind of that traditional structure of unit pacing. And this is, I would say, it appears to be particularly true for the high schoolers, the high school teachers, that they're just a bit reluctant and more likely to say that no, students really kind of we need all the students to stay together. They can't jump ahead, especially skipping over a whole unit. On the next slide, this also shows that teachers, while willing to give students some occasional flexibility and control over their content, what they learn, and then how they learn, are still, rarely giving, are more likely to say that those occurrences are rare. And they are a bit more reluctant they do seem reluctant to give students a lot of control over what and how they learn. So shifting ahead to slide 28, the same can be said again around learning goals. Teachers, a large percentage of teachers are very reluctant to give more than just intermittent opportunities for students to create their own learning goals, and very few are willing to give more than intermittent opportunities where students have unique learning goals. So just to recap on pacing, on control over what and how they learn, and learning goals, teachers are still keeping a firm grasp on those aspects of students' learning experiences. So shifting ahead to slide 29, all of that said, and noting that there does still seem to be some large gaps between our vision for our personalized learning and personalized learning in classrooms and where teachers are nationally, I'd say the survey also offers some really interesting glimpses of opportunities that are out there. So shifting ahead to slide 30, technology. Technology seems to be widely available, with more than half of all the teachers reporting to us that one-on-one devices are available in their classrooms. Of course, technology is not a guarantee of personalization, but it can be a very useful tool for teachers as they try to create more personalized opportunities and environments for students. And the availability of one-on-one devices or one-to-one devices is really helpful in that. Shifting ahead to slide 31. When we looked at survey responses for a sample of teachers that were really engaged in personalized learning, so folks who were really starting to think about personalized learning in a very systematic way, we were encouraged to see them starting to push a bit on some of the tougher things that we noted in the national survey. There was a gap, a small but statistically significant gap, and between their willingness to give students a bit more control, to give more flexibility around pacing, than was offered in the national sample. So again, we cannot say in this with this data because that being part of an initiative pushed them. We don't have before and after data, but what we can say is when folks are focused on that, when there is an explicit initiative, we actually see them pushing a bit on some of the tougher elements of giving up control and giving flexibility and pacing, and we think this is encouraging. And now looking forward, moving on to slide 32. For those who are seeking progress on personalized learning, I would just to sum this all up. This scan suggests to us that the next frontier is to really explore how to shift more learning into the hands of students. It is an area that we saw is, that is still pretty tightly held, that teachers are tightly holding onto. But when given the chance and given the engagement, we do see teachers who are willing to kind of to let go and give students more control. So, moving forward, that seems to be the area where I think that, we might spend some time really exploring what does it take, how do we support teachers to do that work, how do we better support students to have more control in their learning and to have more, to take advantage of flexibility in their pacing, and how do we create a system that better supports that kind of a shift of putting more learning into the hands of students.
We've got a couple of really great questions.
So, and then with that, I think we are moving into questions.
Questions in the chat box on the lower left-hand corner. So Bethany, I'm going to start with you. A question comes in from Becky on, and this is a question came in around your pacing slides, around slide 26, 27, and 28, around pacing, content and lessons, and maintaining control of defining learning goals of teachers versus students. So keep that in mind as background. So the question from Becky is, where does credit recovery for at-risk students fit into this? And Chris, you may want to respond to that too, but Bethany, I'll ask you first.
So, it's hard to say. In the survey, it's not explicitly, surfaced through the survey where credit recovery fits into this. I think Courtney and Chris probably have probably a deeper insight into how they think about it. How do they think about something like that in the context of the learning, the LEAP learning framework? And I think it would be good to hear from them. But I should say that, this doesn't explicitly respond to that. There is one survey item that asks, if students can have as much time as they need to master something. I would say that item actually it seemed that there was more agreement on the part of teachers around flexing time and giving kids more time to do something than is observed in these questions or items that talk about pushing forward. But I'd be curious to hear from Chris or Courtney.
Sure, this is Chris and Courtney. We're on the mic now? Okay, your mic going. Go ahead, Courtney.
So within the survey, what we ask teachers and what we ask students to do specifically is to answer the questions on the survey for a specific teacher and with a specific class in mind. And so I don't think that we have actually had a specific credit recovery classrooms that have participated in the surveys with us. On the teacher side, we suggest that they think about a classroom as they're responding, and we do ask them what grade of class they might be in, and we ask them kind of what subject area that might be in. But we don't, again, necessarily know if it is a credit recovery class. So I don't think that we have results necessarily that suggest what that looks like.
Thanks. This is Susan, and I'll just jump in here. I think this is less related to the survey data, but in early implementations, we often see in districts beginning to do the work on credit recovery sort of traditionally in summer school, and then as they start to have district-wide or school-wide implementations of personalized learning, that's where the LEAP framework, which is much more holistic than just pacing may be one element of a personalized learning model or implementation or approach, but it does not define personalized learning. Really, when we're talking about personalized learning, we're talking about per person or per student and ensuring that students' needs are met. And that's really from a whole student approach and a research-based approach on how students learn best. So if you have the chance to dig in on all of the different elements around the personalized learning framework and each of those big areas of learner-led, learner-demonstrated, learner-focused, have a whole range of sub-elements that are from that feedback from educators, practitioners, and researchers. We have another great question from Laura Shields, and I'll direct this to Chris and Courtney first because it's about the survey, but Bethany, feel free to weigh in. So Chris and Courtney, did the survey ask teachers for their definition of personalized learning? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, has there been any continuum of growth identified for the growth of personalization based on teacher practice? And I think that gets behind the nature of the teacher survey. She adds, in other words, is there a logical progression of practice revealed as you look at those educators who seek to personalize? So the first part of the question is asking about the survey and whether the survey asked teachers for their definition of personalized learning. And the next part is about that continuum of practice.
Yeah, great questions. For the first one, it doesn't ask teachers for their definition of personalized learning. What we were very careful to do in creating the survey was to use language that would be agnostic to any personalized learning framework, whether it was ours or any other one. We tried to ask questions that were very directly focused on specific practices that teachers would be doing. And that demonstrate aspects of our framework, but we did not use that language. And that was so that any teacher could take it and wouldn't get hung up on the language. And when we were working with AIR, we did go through several rounds of cognitive labs, cognitive interviews to make sure that we had any language that would be misleading or unclear removed from the items. For the second question, this is a great one, and it's actually one of the research questions that we're looking at right now. We have a hypothesis. I will say our hypothesis is that before you can successfully move to a true learner-led or learner-demonstrated implementation, you first have to deeply know the students, and the students have to deeply know themselves. And so we do believe that learner-focused is first in that continuum, and we see that play out anecdotally in our schools here in Chicago. However, we do want to actually start looking at the data and see if that proves out through the data collected through the surveys. So we're really excited to learn more about that, and hopefully can tell you about it in the next year or so.
Bethany or Chris, did you want to talk about, I think, some of the early feedback too, as you are working with so many schools, Chris, across the Chicago region, that you have teachers coming in that are newly implementing different designs of personalization, different methods, different designs. And part of the reason of the creation of the framework was really educators asking you to help put together a progression of practice, essentially, to help say, where am I building my strengths, and where are other areas where we want to grow and build in more personalization for students in our classrooms. Can you talk a little bit how you think of what you see in the continuum and the region? And Bethany, I'd just be interested in your studying nationally the different Next Gen Learning Challenges grantees, what you've seen in terms of that continuum of growth for practitioners too.
Sure. This is Chris, and to that point, it's a pretty fascinating question that we think about a lot here. And even with the design of the framework from the beginning, it was intentionally from the student's point of view to not norm practices or school models. So it's sort of model agnostic, and we even kind of say in our work that personalized learning models will look different in every context because the students and the community and the values and the standards of curriculum, it'll vary location by location. But the core question is, are the kids or the learners experiencing these elements? With that being said, we do kind of, as Courtney said, I would build on kind of these hypotheses of things we see that one might consider further along the continuum. I'd also note we did a crosswalk with REACH, which is what's used here in Chicago Public Schools based off the Danielson framework, and found to no surprise if you're familiar with the Danielson framework, a lot of overlap with distinguished, where it gets much deeper into knowing the students, higher level of differentiations, and also a lot of elements around student agency and choice and voice in the instructional design. So I think we're seeing a lot of promising practices and things that are sort of good teaching plus and what that looks like, and going more and more deeper into that, especially with the kind of wide diversity of school teams that we work with here. And I would just say within the surveys themselves, there was sort of a number scale or rating around to it that was co-designed with practitioners to at least give you a sense of are you emerging or where you are in that progression. But I would emphasize at the moment it's sort of model agnostic by design, because we don't want to restrict creativity in the field as everything is emerging.
This is Bethany. So just to respond to that, what we observed in the national study of schools that were engaged in a kind of initiative around personalized learning is, I think, just to echo what Courtney was saying, that there does seem to be a kind of baseline condition of really it's hard to imagine personalizing anything about a student's learning and their pathway through learning without understanding the child themselves. And there is, I think, the first step is to not just, commit to knowing kids, but also to build the structures and supports and tools that help you understand kids as learners, the data systems that need to come into place, and how you use the data, what information are you seeking about learners, and then, sort of the tools that allow kids to have some control over progress. Now, one thing that we did on the topic of staging, though, that came out, and I think that several of the schools that we visited sort of came to this understanding after a few attempts at different efforts to shift control and ownership of the classroom to students, is that there is something to developing students' capacity to really leverage the opportunities towards to show agency, to express their agency, to take control. There are a whole a suite of skills that students need to develop to really take advantage of those kinds of opportunities. And I think that what we saw were a lot of teachers who were sort of passing a lot of control off to students and finding that things sort of fell into a bit of chaos and disarray, and students floundered, and some students did well while other students really struggled through it. And when they backed up a bit, they said, oh, this is a process for kids too, and started to really think about what it takes to onboard and bring kids on board with the new sort of expectations and goals for them as well, and thinking much more intentionally about their development to be able to perform with success in classrooms where they're owning their learning more.
Great, thank you. I have a great question that's come in about primary school students. So how do you feel primary students do at knowing themselves to be more learner-led? And I'll just make a quick comment before turning it over to Bethany and then Chris. That I think some of the key words in this question are about learners developing skills to know themselves as learners. And as I have studied global education systems, I've seen this in New Zealand and Canada, across Europe, that this developing skills to know themselves as learners begins in kindergarten through second grade, throughout primary and elementary, in schools that have been implementing personalized learning for 15 or 20 years in other countries. So I'm interested in hearing how you answer that question. How do primary students do it knowing themselves to be more learner-led?
Well, I'll start off, but I think that the LEAP team probably has an even more up-close view of this in their schools in Chicago. But I would say, actually, little kids are great at it. When we were doing some field visits, we spent in our third round of field visits, we actually conducted student focus groups. So we conducted about 70 different focus groups across all of our sites, and we had several little tykes, as we might call them, involved. And I remember one focus group in particular was a group of fourth graders, and they were describing their class to me, and they talked about going into the classroom and picking up binders that sort of laid out what they were working on, and was sort of their catalog of work through the year. They understood and explained to me, what they were looking for in those binders that let them know what they were going to work on that day. In the class, they rather you know, seamlessly and naturally navigated through different kinds of learning activities. They did different, they knew that they were all on sort of different points in their, we were talking about their math class, in their math class. They talked about going to a friend to get some help before going to the teacher, or when they needed to get to the teacher versus when they're kids. And, you know, and I naively asked one of the kids, you know, how did he feel about this? Did he wish his teacher gave him more direction? Did he wish everybody was just doing the same thing? And he looked at me completely baffled as to why who would ever think to do that? That, you know, this became what was so striking about these kids is that the experience in the learning environment they were describing, they described it as very natural to them. So I think that this is something that is, you know, with the right sort of preparation and the right set of expectations, if you convey this to kids fairly early on, this is not something that feels foreign to them.
Yeah, and this is Chris. I totally agree with everything that you just shared. Sort of, we see it with the little ones that it just becomes the world that they know around education, and they can't imagine why you would have such a teacher-directed type of environment. And also, you know, we see in practice kind of developmentally appropriate. So with the first graders, there might be opening of choice of where you sit within the classroom. And naturally speaking, not everyone makes the best choices there. There's again that conversation with Courtney of why you shouldn't sit next to Chris because he distracts you when you talk to each other, and give an opportunity the next day on what that might look like. But we find is the teacher in the environment allowing opportunities for those experiences for kids to actually be in the driver's seat for these small micro decisions, and showing the adults and others they can trust and sort of scaffold their way through having those reflective questions and just honestly social modeling around what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. There was this awesome moment. We had some people visiting a school a couple of months ago, and a little second grader came up to the principal and asked to meet with her later. She said okay. And then later on the child met with her in her office and explained that he felt that the tours were being disruptive to his learning, and he would like to work with her to find ways that it would, you know, not interrupt them, and that he could continue on his work. And all of that goes to sort of a self-awareness of my activity as a learner. Also, how to like not shout out and do it inappropriately, but how to do a professional conversation as you know, adults. And so there's a lot of like building that concept or identity with the kids as they move through it. But I find over and over in our work, it's just we find it's the adults pulling the students back, and that they can really do some amazing things if you give them the chance and really help model and scaffold for them what the expectations are. The only quick asterisk is the surveys only go down to third grade. And Courtney, you can speak to some of the issues with the little ones with the surveys.
Yeah, so for teachers, the surveys go down through kindergarten, but for students, only through third grade. And, you know, that really is that year where they transition from learning to read to reading to learn. And even in third grade, it's hard. We do have a separate version of the survey for third graders that does have a lower Lexile level throughout. But we tried to go down to second grade and found that we really just couldn't find ways to ask the questions that were at their reading level to get at the, you know, to help them understand it appropriately. So K-2, we don't have a survey for students right now. Certainly it's something we'd love to look at in the future, probably a different format, etc. But yeah, it's 3 and up for now.
Well, thank you, and that's a wonderful note to end on. If you think about how important it is to build and create the identity of our youth, but also our adults in lifelong learning, and building that identity as a learner and as a lifelong learner. So I would like to please have everyone join me in thanking our presenters today for their work and leadership in the research on personalized learning in the U.S. I have such deep gratitude for the wisdom and the willingness to share with all of us. And I would like to thank everyone for their time in joining us today. Thank you. This webinar will be provided online as an open educational resource freely with slides and the webinar recording archived. And thanks for joining us, and please let us know how we can help in your efforts. We will have our range of 100 different reports on competency-based and online learning. Leap Innovation's website is here for the framework, and the Center on Reinventing Public Education, which also released another report on personalized learning in June. Please feel free to contact us if you have follow-up questions or if we can help. Thank you and have a great day.